Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Reaction Time. It's been a while.
It's been a couple weeks.
We had a duel canceled, a snowstorm. You skied.
I cross country
You
skied to a
cross
dual meet.
country skied to Utah Valley. Then we had the bye week. I feel like we haven't sat and talked wrestling in like a month.
It's been a while. It's good to get back.
I was gonna say, but we're back. And I'm back with my latest purchase from eBay. Where's the camera? Look at this thing. This is courtesy of Alex Kukin. Shout out to Kukin. He loves to spend his day, probably not as much as he used to now that he's a dad of twins. But I told him, if you see anything wrestling related, I don't care who the team is, just send it. And he found this beautiful thing. What's the word when you I counter offered to the eBay person? I've never bought anything off eBay, if you can't tell. The person, I should say he, I don't know who it is. Like the price they had it at, if I'd paid it, it'd be like $50, $60. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So I countered and it ended up only being like $30.
Nice.
A steal.
Nice.
So don't mind me being huge homer with this classic Buckle logo. Is that what he's called?
That's the spinny sigh.
Yeah.
Punching sigh.
Aiden?
Yeah,
All
I
different
always say
things.
spinny sigh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's my favorite one, so had to wear it for the pod. Big week for Iowa State. But yeah, we're back. Things are back. The snow is melting. Iowa State's
For now.
Yeah, knock on wood. Iowa State's gonna hit the road to the state of Oklahoma for their last road trip of the season, which is insanity. When
Yeah,
I
it
read
is.
that, when David said it, I was like, what the heck? But we're going to start off strong here. New gambling investigation information came out this week. We've obviously we haven't really talked about it too much on the pod, but yesterday we had media availability with Kevin Dresser and we got over 6 minutes of gambling talk. So for context, earlier this week, if you don't know, Inia Wazarike, former Iowa State football player, was drafted, went to the NFL, was caught up in the gambling investigation. Innie has a lawyer who has been working ruthlessly on this, and I think has been a big savior for a lot of those student athletes. And they uncovered essentially that some of the investigation that kind of started all of this, where student athletes were caught gambling under fake names at certain sports facilities on campus, was done illegally. So there's a ton of information. I recommend you go to like Keith Murphy's tweet. He does a great job of copy pasting the information direct from the lawyers. I'm not going to go into all of that. So I just suggest go to Twitter.
Agreed.
I put it up on the front page of Cyclone Fanatic where I linked to both of his tweets. The first one kind of outlines what Innie's lawyer discovered. I think it was like Monday or maybe Friday last week.
I think it was Monday.
Okay.
I mean, they might have discovered it before, but it was released on Monday.
And then because of that information, Paniro Johnson, that's our guy here, why we're talking about this. Paniro Johnson, Iowa State's 149 pounder, right?
He wrestles at 157 now,
like,
but he was 149 back when he was attached.
Yeah.
Or he's wrestling unattached this year. So
He was the more notorious name for the wrestling team, but Dresser confirmed this week that there were several guys involved, but Paniro was the notorious name. He had a high dollar. I can't remember the number right now, so I'm not even going to try and make it up. His lawyers are now, they're making a fight for it because, they're saying this stuff was done illegally. Paniro does not deserve these charges, whatever's going on. Like I said, go to Keith Murphy's tweet. A lot of legal jargon that we're just going to link you there. But like I said, we spoke with Kevin Dresser yesterday, and he gave us 6 minutes of very candid conversation about it, and he gave us a bunch of details. So first off, I quoted it in my tweet because I thought it was interesting when he first got asked by Randy Peterson from the Register, which, what a day for Eli to be not able to make it to availability.
Yep.
He said, I've had to bite my tongue for a long time. I've almost chewed it off. He made jokes, half jokes, I should say, because they're not lies, about how Nick Juice, what is his official title?
He's in the Iowa State athletic department, but I don't know what his official title is.
Kevin Dresser's boss, essentially.
Essentially, yep.
Who makes sure Dresser isn't going too unhinged in his interviews. And Dresser said that he has been reprimanded a few times, just told like, hey, we need to chill out. But yesterday he gave us a lot of information. So some of the highlights that I put in my personal tweet was he talked about the day that this all went down. He shared with us the way that the team has an unwritten rule that if anything happens, anything illegal, doesn't matter what it is, Dresser wants to be the first one they call. He wants to be able to be in front of it before his boss, before anyone in the media, before Jamie Pollard. Like, he just wants to be the first person to know what's going on, which fair, you're the head coach. These are your guys. And so he said it was a Monday morning in May, according to the court documents, that he started getting all the calls from Paniro. It sounded like Woodley, and he said 3 to 4 others.
Yep.
So there are quite a few, and we had talked about that, how Paniro was the only starter we knew of, and that confirmed that. But basically what he said is the guys called him and said, hey, there's this guy here who's saying he can take my phone. He has a piece of paper that says he can take it. If like we said, if you go to the official documents or Keith Murphy's tweet, in that information, it was said that there wasn't ever really, what is it fair to say, legal warrants to start with?
Right. So they started with no legal warrants.
Yep.
Like, there was not a warrant to have these people searched. They obtained information to get warrants seemingly illegally, allegedly illegally.
Yeah.
I do think it's important to note that neither me or Jackie or lawyers know all that much about the law. So we are basically recapping what has happened to our best knowledge. So they were, to my knowledge, served warrants, but those warrants were obtained sort of under false pretenses. So while I think under normal circumstances, those warrants would have been probably fine, the way that they were obtained because they started the search without a warrant is interesting to say the least. And again, if a lawyer is listening to this, please educate me, because
for sure.
One thing that I have been curious about, and one thing I asked Dresser about, is the first thing Dresser said to those wrestlers once the guy told them to hand over their phones is Dresser said, let's get a lawyer and let's see what we can do about this. So I immediately asked the follow-up question of, so were they able to get a lawyer before their phones were taken? And they were not. They did not have a right to a lawyer. I don't know if that's normal in a search warrant or if that's not normal in a search warrant. My assumption would have been that you get a lawyer or you can have one. But that didn't happen. So if there's a lawyer talking or listening to this and you do know, please let me know, because that's one thing that I'm just like, that seems a little bit sketchy. I could see it either way, but yeah, that's one thing. It's like, oh boy, interesting. They took phones without letting them talk to a lawyer first. So
and Dresser said they kept the phones for a week.
Yep, they kept them for a week.
So that was one of the things he shared, which he had never talked about what all of that looked like. So it is very interesting how that all went down. And then we talked about Paniro Johnson, which we haven't really done. It's just been kind of one of those things that's been just kind of like the elephant in the room. I've spoken to Paniro just kind of off to the side at a few duels, and he seemed to be trying to stay in high spirits. But the quote that I pulled was, Dresser said, it's a good thing that Paniro has thick skin and he's been through what he's been through in his life, because there were some dark days for him. And I believe it. I mean, Paniro, if you know him, if you follow him, if you saw how he did last season, like, he has a huge personality. If we joke about how Younger thinks he's like the best, no, Paniro Johnson screamed it on the top of Hilton Coliseum that he was the best. Like, he has a huge personality. He won a Big 12 title as a freshman. Like, he was on top of the world. And then to have all of that kind of come crumbling down when all of this started, because then, you know, he wasn't able to compete. I'm sure NIL deals kind of dwindled. And now you're stuck wrestling unattached. And I'd shared this before. He's now at 157, just because what Paniro shared with me was that coach didn't want him to be focusing too hard on like cutting weight or training too hard because of it, and just focus on being on the mat, wrestle your matches, get your wins. So I feel like that's probably what a way Dresser tried to support him, right? Like, keep his mind focused and at least keep him in the wrestling room when dealing with this. So, and then the other thing that I noted was He said, sure, we want to beat the University of Iowa, but what happened to those seniors at Iowa? They shouldn't have had their careers end like that. So Cassiope, the heavyweight for Iowa, and then Nelson Brands. What weight is Nelson?
He was at 74.
Okay, I was like, I can't remember off the top of my head. And Nelson's been very vocal about the entire thing on Twitter. If you go follow and
Sure has.
read through his tweets. So yeah, Dresser was just really candid. He was just open about how he doesn't excuse what happened. Like, he doesn't excuse that the rule was broken. That's clearly, like, that line's in the sand, right? Like, we all have acknowledged that they shouldn't have been doing it. But now it's like, okay, it's one thing to say they shouldn't have been doing it, but then completely going about it in what sounds like illegal approach to it. And so Dresser was very vocal about how he does hope these athletes get justice and that they, you know, take it to Iowa, put up a fight. And that seems like what's going to happen.
It does.
So, I mean, other takeaways you had from what Dresser had to say?
Yeah, I mean, we covered most of it just now. One notable thing that he said is he wants heads to roll in Des Moines. What heads are those? I'm not sure. I think we can probably deduce and draw some lines and arrows and be like, all right, that's probably one of them.
Yeah.
The other thing that he wanted to emphasize was that the state right now in the two cases that are being brought up they seem to be wanting to put it on a fall guy. Whether that's Brian Sanger or Troy Nelson, the two that have been named most in both of these. I'm not sure. Troy Nelson was named twice, once in Ennies and once in Paniro. So it might be they're trying to go after Troy Nelson. But I think Brian Sanger was obviously named very heavily in Ennie Wazarique's. So I think Dresser was heavily indicating that he believes it's much bigger than one or two rogue agents that decided to do this for fun, which that's when you read Ennie's stuff, it almost seemed like Brian Sanger was doing it for fun. Like, he was just poking around the computer, drawing a couple geofences and seeing what he could find out, which is a very casual and callous way to go about your job, especially for government official. So iffy just on that front, if that's what he's doing. But that's besides the point. I am interested to see as more and more of these legal cases come out, and as Ennie's lawyer goes deeper and as Paniro's lawyer go deeper, because this isn't the end of it. This is probably more of the beginning.
I say this is the start.
What more comes out? Because I agree with Dresser. I don't think it's one or two guys just having fun. I think if they didn't have a direction to do this, then that's shame on their supervisor, because that means their supervisor wasn't supervising them and they were ignorant to it all. And if they did say, hey, go do this, find out what you can, well, then that's illegal too. So there's the state's in some trouble. Us who live in Iowa will be on the hook for probably a pretty good chunk of change. Any Wazarique is going to have very, very provable damages in the millions.
Yeah.
So unless something crazy happens, we, the taxpayers, will be paying any Wazarique millions of dollars. Student athletes, it's going to be a little bit harder. They're going to have provable damages. It's going to be harder to nail down exactly what those are. Obviously, like Jackie said, loss of NIL and things like that, that's a very real thing. Some guys maybe lost a scholarship, loss of opportunity. So there's going to be things where it'll likely cost the state millions. And if all of these things are proven, right? All of these things have to be proven. But it's currently, we'll see how it all plays out, but currently not looking great for the state. And it is looking very good for the student athletes in terms of that, which is good. As annoying as it is to pay for the state's mistakes, in this case, I mean, if justice is being served, I'm happy to help with that justice. So
yeah, I feel like when I look at this situation, and I saw people arguing about this on Twitter, what's going to happen in the investigation is very separate from what the NCAA did.
Very separate, yes.
Like, it's not like, hypothetically speaking, and again, legal proceedings we see take a long time. Like, this isn't going to suddenly be like, oh, they were wrong. Okay, Paniro Johnson is now not in trouble, and the NCAA is going to give him that year back. Like,
not a chance.
That's not what's happening.
0% chance.
At this point, these athletes are just, fighting for their rights, for the ones who are being charged. Like Paniro specifically, he was or is being charged.
Felony.
I was going to say, you'd have to go back and look, and which is something.
He still is being charged as a felon.
Which is something Dresser brought up. It's like, they broke a rule, but then you go and look at how these guys are now being painted in all of this, right? Like you said, Paniro's now being charged as a felon, you know? So this is all, yeah, I just want to make it very clear that the NCAA probably isn't going to change their rules now. They did that already.
Yeah, I don't think there's a probably. I think there's a 0% chance that any of these guys get any eligibility back. That will not happen. Like Dresser said, they broke the rule. They served the punishment. That's already happened. The NCAA, that stuff's done and over with. Right now, it's all legal stuff.
Yep. So that was something I was thinking. I was like, I want to make that point. So there's just no point in discussing like eligibility, getting that time back. It's just not going to happen. And it is what it is. They did their time. But so now it's all legal, and it's a matter of like, for example, his pro career's done.
Yep.
So like he has a lot of damages to go after, and Paniro has to go fight for his name, right? So I think it's going to be a really long one. I definitely will say it as always, refreshing to have Dresser as who we're covering, because he just kind of gives it to us like it is, and he doesn't really hold back. Hope he didn't get in trouble.
Not too much trouble.
Yeah.
He gave himself a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10 yesterday in terms of how much trouble he might be in. So I think he feels pretty good about it.
No, and I think it's important to be transparent, and I think it's good that he was. I think I saw some people saying it shows his relationship with the team, which is true. I feel like there were certain conversations that were had about other athletes where there weren't as honest conversations with their coaches. And I'm not even talking necessarily about Iowa State. I'm just talking in general for anyone tries to point fingers or try and guess what I'm referencing. But like, I do think that my takeaway from that was it is a very positive sign of how close this team is, right? Because we only see when they walk out the tunnel and we watch them get coached, and then that's it. And then whatever Dresser says during the week. So it is, I think if you're a fan and this is your head coach for your favorite team, I think it's a positive to see how much this team trusts each other, right? So it was an interesting press conference. I would love to know what was going through Andy's head. Andy's SID, for you guys, if you don't know that, we've talked about him before, but I was wondering, just because I remember years ago when we interviewed Dresser and I asked him something and he said shit. And sorry, Aiden, now he has to add an explicit tag. But I remember right as we got done with Dresser, Brad was like, gosh, dang it. Because he knew he was going to get Dresser in trouble for saying a swear word in the video I was obviously going to share. So,
yeah.
But check out the video. I have it on the front page. I also tweeted it. I'm sure there will be plenty more to come. Again, I'll plug Keith Murphy again. He didn't ask me to do this. He does a good job at it. I always retweet his stuff because I just can't keep up with the legal side of things. That is well above my head, unfortunately. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And honestly, I would be so curious to know what's going through Paniro's head. Especially just given that he's in the state. Like, I don't think he has any family here.
I don't think so.
So, yeah, Dresser's his guy. So, yeah. But any final thoughts on the gambling?
No final thoughts on the gambling. Just like you said, it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out.
And I say thankfully because it's one guy, right? It's an important guy. Paniro's important. He's a key guy to the lineup last season. But thankfully, Iowa State managed, if they were going to be hit, they got hit in a very soft way compared to like Iowa, who lost Nelson and lost Cassiope, which I'm still heartbroken about Cassiope, but neither here nor there. So as updates come, we'll try to share them, but that's what we got this week. So like I said, 6 minutes. That's a long interview.
It was.
I don't even know how much Tom Brands gave at his.
It looked like 2 minutes and about 40 seconds.
Yep.
And you can go listen to that if you want. It is, in my opinion, much less good. More bad would be another way to say that than Dresser's. As he just didn't. He went after the wrong people.
Just angry.
Yeah. He's just mad to be mad. So, Dresser, I thought, handled himself well. Might he get in a little bit of trouble? Yes. I think Randy asked him afterward if he's worried about the trouble he might get in, and Dresser just looked up and laughed at him and said no. So he's not going to get in any serious trouble at all. He might be told to be like, hey, let's maybe use this word instead of that word, but like he's going to be fine. So, other things from availability, though. Casey Swiderski, sounds like he's going to be back.
Yeah, stop panicking, people.
So he should be back. They are going to bring Zach Redding, too. So if you see an or on the lineup sheet, that's why. And maybe Zach Redding wrestles against Oklahoma and it's first against Oklahoma State. But it sounds like unless there's a setback between Friday and Tuesday when we talk to Dresser, Swiderski should be back in the lineup. So I think that's great.
Well, and you'll be listening to this podcast Thursday morning. So the team will probably already be on a bus.
Yes, they will.
So,
yep.
No, but that's exciting. I'm excited. It sounds like the extended break was good for the team to get back to health. They feel great, it sounds like. So I'm excited. They are headed to Oklahoma. Oklahoma's on Friday. Oklahoma State's on Saturday. They are Big 12 duels. So they'll be on ESPN Plus.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about wonky, difficult streaming. Just turn on ESPN Plus. I feel like everyone has to have ESPN Plus at this point.
If you're an Iowa State fan, you have it for sure.
But other things from availability before we dive into that. Something that I thought was really interesting after you redirected the conversation?
Yep.
We looked back at wrestling. Number one, we talked about Younger Bastida, your favorite wrestler in the lineup. I asked Coach this question, actually. I asked him about managing Younger's personality, right? He's this explosive monster on the mat, which is awesome. It's why we love him. And I asked him, like, how do you manage that? Because in the past, Coach had made comments like, oh, yeah, we got to keep him from getting his head too big, especially when they would go to Oklahoma State back in the day when our good pal AJ Ferrari was in the lineup.
Yep. And just to redirect this in case some people don't know, I think it might have been like the first dual meet Younger Bastida ever wrestled, first or second, he wrestled AJ Ferrari. And they got themselves in a position where AJ Ferrari grabbed Younger Bastida's manhood very obviously. And Younger opened his legs, pointed to it, and it's like, ref, what's going on here? And then that's when AJ let go of it. So
for context,
Younger and AJ probably not best friends, even though AJ might want to be. So,
well, and so I asked Coach, like, how are you managing it now? Right? Like, he's obviously dominant this season. He's winning. He's comfortable. He's gaining or maintaining weight. Sounds like
240.
And he said it's actually the opposite. He said that Younger has a tendency to get a little complacent in matches where he's very clearly favored. He's going to win. He's going to dominate. So Dresser said that he'll literally have to talk trash to him, tell him he sucks or something before he goes out there to get his head, all right, get in there, be angry, be dominant. What were some of the other things he said? Oh, you're not conditioned enough.
You're not conditioned enough, not good enough on bottom, I think was one of them. Not eating right, I think was one of them. Very wrestling things.
Yep. And we then got Younger at availability, and I think Rob asked him about it, oh yeah, and he was like, yeah, he has to talk trash to me a little bit to get me amped up. But I thought that was so interesting because in my head I'm like, how do we keep him rallied up? How do we keep him in a cage without breaking it? But it sounds like Dresser was, again, candid and said, yeah, I've learned a lot on how to coach him better this season, which, again, that's so interesting to me. So just such an interesting dynamic with Younger's progress and how much he's grown and how dominant he is and how much him and Dresser are still learning what works best for them. And I think that's really great because you guys will listen to a conversation that will get brought up when we have Seth on the podcast here in a few, but how he talked about how John Smith needed to kind of learn to adapt to new things, right? Well, I feel like Dresser and the way he's learned to coach Younger, it's that, right? He's adapting, he's learning how to adapt to his guys. And I thought that was really interesting. So that was the thing we should have brought up. Anything else?
I think that's it.
But yeah, like we said, Oklahoma State. Ben and I were lucky enough to get an Oklahoma wrestler, our good pal Seth. If you have never heard of him, Seth Duckworth, Seth_Duckworth on Twitter. He does a fantastic job of covering Oklahoma sports. He covers high school and college now for Oklahoma Wrestle. And he joined us to talk all things Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. He gives great perspective about the growth of the programs. Both programs had a lot of off-season, I don't know what the word is, coaching changes, shifts. So he gave a lot of great insight. It's a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And if you're a Big 12 fan, I totally recommend following Seth. He very knowledgeable and keeps up a lot with just all of the things happening in Oklahoma. So Any thoughts, Ben, before we transition?
Nope, I think that's it.
Well, in the words of Kevin Dresser, we'll let you guys listen to us talk about John Smith, who is a badass. That is exactly what Kevin Dresser said. So, yeah, we'll have Seth on next. We are now joined by our good friend Seth, who currently works for OWrestle, Oklahoma Wrestle, covering, I almost said Iowa, Oklahoma high school wrestling and college wrestling. Seth, welcome to the pod.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be on.
Yeah, of course. This is my favorite weekend when it comes to Big 12. Missouri's the second, but I guess I can't say that. You and I can't forget you
I was
and I.
going to say, what about you and I?
But
So
I do love the Oklahomas. I think there's just a special rivalry with the whole, long-term Big 12 aspect of it. So I'm pumped. Looking ahead, number one, will you be at the duels?
I should be. I'm kind of all over the place. There's some high school stuff I'm going to go to, and I'm not 100% sure I'm going to hit both of them, but yeah, I'll definitely be one or the other. But the unique thing is, I know like you guys are Iowa State, but you and I will be here too, and so I don't. There's like can't decide if I'm going to Norman or Stillwater, where I'll be, and then like I obviously again there's high school stuff all weekend, so we'll kind of see how it all plays out. But I should be at least at Iowa State, OSU for sure. So
nice.
Because how long have you covered the college programs?
So yeah, that's kind of how I broke into wrestling media, so to speak. I kind of was in a similar, I guess, role or whatever, except for I didn't take pictures like you, Jackie. But like I was the Oklahoma State beat writer for Pistols Firing, which is kind of similar to what you guys. I mean, very very similar to what you guys are, but for Oklahoma State, where it's all sports. But I was the wrestling guy, and at one point they put out an ad or whatever, I guess, that they were trying to hire a wrestling person because most of their folks were I don't know, traditional football, basketball, whatever, and they didn't really know wrestling, so they wanted a guy that knew it and understood it. And I'd never done any I was a finance major in college. My day job, I'm in the military, and so that's what I do for a living. And so I like nothing to do with journalism, nothing anything like that. But I thought, hey, I've wrestled in high school and knew the sport well. I'd always been a big Oklahoma State fan, and I'd decided to give it a shot. Applied, and now it's been 7 years later. I've been doing wrestling stuff, but really the first 6 years I was still working for Pistols Firing. But then about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, a guy that had basically started a Missouri wrestling site started Oklahoma high school wrestling site, and it's similar to what you guys know up there as IA Wrestle. It's basically the exact same thing. And I was kind of, I was like, I might try this and see what I think or whatever. And I applied, got to talk to him, started doing it, and sort of turned my focus to just that site over a little bit of time, and quit Pistols Firing, and I'm doing high school, college, everything across state Oklahoma right now. So it's been a blast. I love it. It's kind of challenging, and I mean, I know you guys know, but like mixing it with your regular job and all that stuff and family and life, but I love it. It's been a blast. But yeah, about 7 years total doing it.
Honestly, more power to you. When I'm like sitting at my desk and some high school kid decides to commit, I'm like, gosh, dang it. Like, I got 8 different things going on. I got a meeting. Like, I don't have time. So, honestly, props to you for covering the entire state. I don't think I could do it.
No,
I really don't think I could.
It's
focused.
it's a challenge, definitely. Like I feel spread out a lot, and last year I kind of kept it. I was crazy enough to take on Pistols Firing, and then I did the Big 12 for Intermat and OWrestle, and I was like, man, and I kind of hit my wall, and so I settled in. Like, and I love all the people at Intermat, love all the people at Pistols Firing, but I just kind of was like, man, I need to focus on one thing and draw it back a little bit. But I still, I have those moments too. But I overall, it's been great. So.
Awesome. Well, you've obviously been around both programs for a long time. I would love to hear from you, starting with Oklahoma. Obviously, they went through the adversity of the coaching changes, guys leaving. How have you seen them bounce back? And really, what are your thoughts on them going up into this matchup against Iowa State?
Yeah, that's been, the story of the season. They last year they got wholesale change in the coaching staff. Not too long after the NCAA tournament, they fired, or I think he stepped down, but we all know what that means. Lou Rosselli, who had been the coach for a couple of years, and then there was a pretty long job search, and it was I mean, I was a little bit critical of it personally, and I thought like there was a lot of weird things that happened. They kind of had at one point had made an offer to I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but he's at North Carolina now, but he was at Stanford.
Oh, yep.
Had originally came from Cornell, and they were kind of like hosting him and very hard going after him. He basically turned them down, and then they kind of had like a mix of a couple other people that they were looking pretty solid at, but they, nothing ever materialized with it. And then ultimately it comes out they end up hiring Roger Kish from North Dakota State, who'd had some success up there, and I think is a good hire. Ultimately, I do think like he's a good coach. I've been able to meet with him and do a lot of. I actually live in Stillwater, so my commuting to Norman for every media day and a little bit and all those things is a little bit challenging in every duel. But I've been to 4 or 5 of them and got to talk to him enough that I do kind of believe in what he's doing. I do think he's a good coach. I think they ultimately got a good hire, but the story there with that, whatever, I don't know, 2 months, I think it was, where they were dragging out the hiring process and they didn't have anybody really manning the ship. They had Tion Ware, and I mean, they still had hadn't fired their assistant staff, but some of them, I don't know, they kind of were in limbo and didn't know what was going to happen with them. So I don't think they were really working to hold on to recruits and different things like that. And even if they were, only one of them, Tion Ware, was the only one that stayed around as an assistant. But ultimately that's where, I mean, with the transfer portal, they lost a lot of guys. They lost like half the starting roster from last season, but Kish comes back in and, or gets hired, comes in and has to make some quick transfer portal moves, some quick decisions on a lot of different things. I mean, even recruit a little bit because there was a little bit of a window there that they could get some guys on the team. And I think he did a pretty good job considering all that, that he was just so late in the game to being even able to, start recruiting and get those guys out of the transfer portal, because a lot of them were already getting picked up. They got a 125 out of he had actually is originally from Texas and had been I believe at West Virginia or something like that, and he's a freshman. He's pretty solid. He's been in and out of the top 25, but he's decent. They got their 165 Carlson. They had a couple guys that they Hoos, which was from Buffalo. He was, and him and Carlson were both kind of set up to transfer to North Dakota State. So he was able to kind of peel them over with him, as he already had those relationships established and stuff. But he put together a decent roster, and one that I think is not too far off of what they had last year. Not much tremendously better, but not really. You don't really look at it and go, okay, like these guys are much worse than what they had last year, much different or whatever. So ultimately, considering all the things and the process, how long it took to hire him and everything, I think they put together a decent roster. They've took some lumps, they've lost some duels and stuff like that. But, even with transfers and some of his guys he's brought in and everything like that, it does take some time. And, I don't know that they're ready to challenge Iowa State this year with what Iowa State has, but I do think they're going to wrestle competitively. They're going to go out there and scrap. They're well coached. They are pretty hard nosed style. And like I say, I think he put together a good roster. He brought most of his staff from North Dakota State. He kept Tion Ware here, who was had been at Wyoming and then came to OU. He's kind of a local legend here. He's a 2-time national champ at OU. But they've been good. I don't know that they're ready to challenge Iowa State, but I think, again, considering all the things and new coaching staff, get a late hire, late to get into, peeling people out of the transfer portal, I think they've done a pretty good job. But yeah, it'll be a challenge to definitely with Iowa State this season.
For sure. Given what happened in the offseason, I've been impressed by what I've seen from Oklahoma this year, because I didn't even expect them to be this good, given everyone that left. And I liked Kish at North Dakota State. I was like, all right, that's probably a good hire in the long term, but I wasn't sure what was going to happen, and especially at 197 with Stephen Buchanan. He just transferred in from Wyoming. Does he stay? Obviously, he did, and ranked number 2 in the country right now. How important was it for Kish to keep Buchanan?
Oh, massively. I mean, you've got a surefire All-American and a guy that could win a national title and all the things. And I that was a really interesting one to me because, I mean, the staff. So the story there, I guess, is Tion Ware, again, who I mentioned earlier, was an assistant at Wyoming, came back to his alma mater, OU. He's from Edmond North, which is 30 minutes away from Norman. And basically Buchanan followed him, but there was kind of a lot of uncertainty. Is Tion even staying? I mean, at least from the fan standpoint, I mean, maybe they knew the whole time. I don't really know, but it was like, are they getting rid of the whole staff? Or they, what's going to happen here? And Tion did end up staying, and during that whole year, Buchanan came over like mid-semester, beginning of the semester last year. So he could have easily just left, because he never even competed for OU.
Right. That's what I expected.
Yeah. And he hung around. And I mean, you talked to some of the kids, like there was, I think I want to say Heinzelman, maybe their heavyweight, was one I talked to. And he's like a through and through OU guy. Like he, was born and raised OU fan and all those things. And, I don't think he was one that he would ever hesitate to leave, but he's kind of like, well, we didn't really know, I didn't know they were going to hire. I didn't know, so we were kind of just all in limbo sitting there. And I know Heinzelman's not going to leave, like a guy that's that connected to the school and everything, but you kind of worry about those guys that aren't from Oklahoma, aren't from, this area, aren't transfer that came here and hadn't even wrestled yet, but they held on to him. And that was a huge one. That was a pivotal one. Cause I mean, that's been, and obviously Rosselli was who hired Tion originally and who brought Buchanan here, but that's kind of been his rap sheet, so to speak. And that's what, I mean, I'm not saying that is exactly what led to him getting fired, but they weren't putting out a whole lot of All-Americans. They weren't putting out, they weren't winning any national titles. They would, get a couple NCAA qualifiers, and one year they did tie OSU and won the Big 12 and everything. But they were really kind of needing. I mean, that's something that their brand was missing, so to speak, is guys that could win national titles, and Buchanan's one of those guys. And so, yeah, it's massive for that program to still have him, and especially in this first year of a new regime with Kish. So.
I was definitely rooting for Stephen Buchanan to just look towards Ames.
I was too a little bit. Once Rosselli got fired / stepped down, it's like, oh boy, is there a way that we can get Buchanan to Ames? So I definitely
has anyone called it? No, I mean, honestly, I was scared that they weren't going to have a wrestling program anymore. Like, I was worried that they were just going to dismantle it and call it a day.
Going to the SEC. And,
I mean, there was. I don't know enough inside knowledge at OU with what was going, but like I said, they're going to SEC. SEC doesn't have wrestling. Missouri had that weird transition period where about 10 years, the Big 12 wouldn't let them back in for wrestling. And then, it actually worked out pretty well for them. Cause I mean, look, they're about as strong as they've ever been right now. But there was a lot of sort of buzz and rumors and things like that. And it's crazy to me because when I look at it on the surface, they got 7 national titles in wrestling. I mean, that's more than they got in football. Or I mean, the same, I guess, same number of titles they have in football. Danny Hodge is the Heisman of wrestling is named after their guy. And, Dave Schultz, Mark Schultz, like all these big names in the sport and all these things. But, I mean, we know what, I mean, as much as I love wrestling and covering wrestling, it's not it doesn't make money for the university. It doesn't have all these big things about it. And OU really, a lot of the support has sort of dwindled, I guess. And there was, people seeing things like that. I think there was some concern that was going to happen. I do think if it would have got to a point that the athletic directors would have said something like that, they would have, people would have stepped up and probably put some money into it. And I think there would been a big outcry, but ultimately, I mean, I don't know how serious those talks were. I do know when it happened, like when Rosselli stepped down, they had kind of a period where the athletic director did come out and say, yeah, we're not dropping wrestling or anything like that. We do plan on keeping it as we go. So he did come out with a statement and say that. But there were definitely rumors floating around and things like that. And I don't know how true there were or anything else, because again, I know the athletic director definitely said that they were here to stay, but who knows? So
yeah, I think the fact that the athletic director had to say that is a little bit of the concerning part. Because like, if you're secure in it, I don't know that you need to say it. So the fact that he needed to say it, I think, is like, oh boy. And they have kept it great. I love it. But I don't love that they had to say it. So
yeah.
glad they did though, for sure.
Well, and then you have Oklahoma State, where they didn't necessarily have a boring offseason either. Was John Smith going to retire or not? And then all the craziness in that 1 week span of the staff changes with the assistant leaving and then who they brought in and stuff. How have you seen their season? I mean, they're back in the top 5, which is great for the Big 12. Talk about them and how you've seen them bounce back from that. Or not really bounce back. I don't know if I'd say they necessarily fell off because of the staff changes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is probably, at least definitely since I've been covering wrestling in Oklahoma, as far as colleges go, wildest offseason in the history of the sport. I mean, I think you could maybe some of the Ferrari stuff and all those things going on there, you could rank that up there. But as far as like coaching changes and all that stuff, it's been pretty insane. And last year, I mean, if you really look at the history of wrestling back in like the early 1900s or whatever, there were only maybe 20 programs or something like that. And then in the 70s they had something like 200, and then it kind of dropped back down, and the numbers have been up and down and stuff like that. But as far as actual finishes at the NCAA tournament, last year was the worst finish in the history of Oklahoma State wrestling. And it was kind of hilarious. I mean, it's crazy to talk about because it's like, a person's job or whatever, but we're doing the post tournament wrap up with John Smith, and somebody asked, do you think you're coming back? Are you retired or whatever? And like, I can't remember what the exact quote was, but he goes, well, I plan to, but they may can my ass. And so he basically was like,
yeah, I remember that too.
I do remember that.
Because I mean, he really, like, it's out there. And, you think about it, like John Smith, 6 world titles and 5 national titles as a coach at Oklahoma State. It's really, I think if a lot of things didn't change, that it would have been to that point or whatever. But ultimately, the move they make in the coaching hire this offseason was Coleman Scott, who was the head coach at North Carolina. He comes over as an assistant, and there's nothing, and you couldn't get this out of either John or Coleman if you asked him, but they won't come out right out and say, like, the plan is for Coleman to take over the assistant coach, or as the future head coach. But the writing's on the wall. I think that was the plan, and that's clearly what they kind of agreed to, and at least in kind. And I'm sure there is, like, I don't think there's anything written saying that, obviously, but I think they're basically going to kind of see, the athletic director will see how this thing plays out over this season and how it's played out so far and how maybe the next couple of years go or whatever. And then they'll make that transition as long as it continues to be successful. But ultimately, last year they were, again, they're the worst NCAA tournament finish in the history of the program. And right now they're ranked about 5th, but the coaching staff change is a big story. But really what I think they managed to do is they changed just a lot of the ways they do things. And I think, I love John. Like, John's really always been good to me and nice enough to me as far as media stuff. And I mean, you run into him at a grocery store, he's, plays with my kid, and he's like really, really genuinely a nice guy. But at least from the standpoint that I've seen, there's different, I don't know if you're a competitor with him or something, maybe you got a different story there, but so with that, like, it's still, you got to succeed. I mean, you got to win, you know what I mean? And you can't, there's all these things that it's got to happen quick if you're in that scenario where you finish the worst in the Oklahoma State wrestling history at the NCAA tournament. So what, beyond just the coaching staff changes, they did really quickly was they adjusted to the transfer portal. And I don't think John was doing anything with the transfer portal up till that. They really just, like, it was just like, we're building our guys, we're sticking with them, and probably a little bit of stubbornness and the old school way of doing things. And it wasn't working. So they they went to the transfer portal. They got a new 125. They got a new 141. They got a new like there's a little bit of story of, with 149. There's kind of they're wrestling for the job right now, I think. But he's Sammy Alvarez and Jordan Williams are kind of going at it for the job. Alvarez has started the last couple matches, and I assume will start versus Iowa State. But he's big. He's a transfer portal guy from Rutgers. They had 165 who now that guy's Linnick is having an incredible year. He lost a match a couple weeks ago, but a while back he finished ahead of David Carr at what was it, Reno or but they really kind of have worked the transfer portal and did that. And I think that's been, as much as I do think Coleman Scott's doing a good job, and I think he's been a boost to the program, that's been a big lift for him. And I think they're doing a little bit more with NIL stuff to kind of pull some of those guys in too, out of the portal and recruit and all those different things. So those have been the three big shifts in the offseason for Oklahoma State. And it's kind of, again, like just the same as we've seen a completely new roster for OU, it's a new roster for Oklahoma State too. There's 5-6 new starters, and the guys that are back, Dayton Fix, Dustin Plott, there's pretty good guys back. Yeah, so the way they've reworked that and kind of recreated that is it's worked. It's improved them a lot. I think they match up pretty well with Iowa State if you look at it, and I don't know. What's weird to me is my personal thought is I don't think Oklahoma State beats Iowa State in a tournament. I don't know that they would beat them at the Big 12s. They weren't even close at Reno, and when Iowa State won, and they were I think like 5th or something like that. But in a duel, I think they could win, and then just because they match up well. But then I kind of favor Iowa State in a tournament format at either the Big 12s or in Civil A's. But that's just my thought. But
yeah, I mean, I can see how you get there. For me, the marquee matchup this upcoming weekend is going to be David Carr versus Olynyk. And for someone who hasn't followed Oklahoma State that closely and hasn't seen Olynyk wrestle that much, can you tell us a little bit about what he brings to the table?
He's, for those that don't really haven't followed him, he was an All-American at Northern Illinois, last year, and he came over from the transfer portal. Good kid. Like he's probably, I want to say he's a 5th year with the COVID year, and so he's probably 24, 25, kind of an older college athlete, I guess, so to speak, and real mature. When you talk to him, you can kind of tell, you can read those kids that just have that different, they've been around for a little while. When we do the media availabilities and stuff like that, he's just really well spoken. He's a coach's kid. He's from California originally, and his dad was a high school coach, and his high school coach, obviously. And I think he didn't get looked at very much out of high school. Northern Illinois was like one of his only offers. I want to say it's what he told us, and he kind of blossomed into an All-American, but I do think he's jumped a little bit since coming to Oklahoma State. I mean, he won that tournament the Carr was in earlier. I don't know how well they match up directly. We haven't seen that one yet, but he's long. He's kind of a taller 165. He's I don't know, just really solid wrestler, and has had a good start. Interestingly, Oklahoma State and their coaching staff and all those things kind of have guys that wrestle around that weight. Tyler Caldwell is one of the assistants. He was a 65-74 in college. Chris Perry, same thing. He's a little bigger now, but those guys like competed around that weight. So I think that kind of helps, working with him in the room and that sort of thing. And OSU's weirdly kind of always had success around that size with Perry and Caldwell, and then Alex Dieringer, and they've just always had a lot of guys around that size. So he's improved a lot. He did take a loss a couple of weeks ago, but he was up to, I want to say, like 2 or 3 in the country, and that's a really, really tough weight class at 165. Yeah. So we'll see how it's definitely the marquee matchup. I would guess they probably close the duel on that, but we'll see what happens. Who knows? Because I mean it's a tight enough duel that I think whoever they may pick a different weight just because they want to see whatever they think benefits them the most. But I think if you're doing it from a spectator standpoint, you'd end the duel at 165. So
agreed.
I feel like they will. I mean, it sounds, for me, from over the years, I feel like Smith and Dresser would be good about being like, Let's start this
Oh yeah,
this
for
one
sure.
end on a high note.
Mm-hmm.
They're entertainers.
They are.
Honestly, how old is Dayton Fix? How old is he?
So he did. I don't like this would be he did an Olympic red shirt his sophomore.
Mhm.
I want to say he's 25 or 26. He might have just turned 26.
Yeah.
So it's 25 or 26. So yeah, he's been around. Yeah, and technically he could be taking an Olympic red shirt this year, so he could be wrestling next year if he wanted to. But he obviously didn't do that. But
Yeah, you know,
Crazy.
I feel like my body would be dead.
yeah,
Like there's just no way. I feel like when we at Iowa State when they had Willie Miklas come in for his final year, he was what, 25?
Yep.
And he was saying he's like, my body hurts, like I feel old. And the COVID years now obviously have changed the game, and it's more common now to be 25 in wrestling than it used to be. But my gosh, shout out to Dane Fix. I can't believe
yeah.
he's still wrestling.
I think the way OSU's, I mean, he was hurt for a little bit, and had to miss some matches because of that. But I do think, yeah, I don't. People that say like John Smith or Dayton Fix would dodge people or something like that are nuts. Like that's not either one of them style. That would never be a
Right.
thing. But I do think there's something to like I talked about some of the things where John kind of I think was missing a little bit and maybe being a little bit old school about how he was doing things, and transfer portal being a big one, NIL being a big one, and I think wrestling guys a lot more than they probably should was another one. So the COVID year, the last year the COVID year they had a really good season. They put together like 5 or 6 All-Americans, finished third in the country, and it was a shortened season. They didn't wrestle a whole lot. And then the next year's like I kind of feel like they were burning guys out a little bit and wrestling them too much. So I do think when Dayton was hurt, they took their time bringing him back and let him kind of slowly recover and stuff like that. And it's partially from the standpoint that John was seeing that's maybe a mistake he was making and something they needed to adjust as a staff and how they were doing stuff, but also like you said, he's 25, 26 years old. Your body, isn't what it used to be or whatever at that point. And so maybe it was a little bit of that too, but that's just my opinion. But I do think they're playing that game a little bit and realizing that, hey, he is a little bit older, but I don't think, a duel like Iowa State or Northern Iowa or whatever, they're not going to step back from that. So.
Right. So once you kind of, as someone who covers both programs, let's say it's Sunday morning, the duels have come and gone. What is the one thing you're looking for each program? And it's not a win or loss. I'm talking just what would you like to have happen for both programs?
Oh, that's a tough question. So I think with OU, I know you said not one specific win or loss, I guess, but you kind of want to win any match you can, right? And I mean, and that's cliche to say. Obviously, you want to win every match you can, but realistically, I don't think with where OU is and all the things we were talking about earlier with, the turnover and new coaching staff and everything like that, you can't really expect OU to go out and beat Iowa State. It's just being realistic about it, where they're at right now. But you want to see their guys that can win, and you want to see the guys that even in losses are competitive and keeping it close. And that's that's I think that's something that a lot of fans during the Rosselli era were a little bit frustrated with, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'll talk like when the OU, I don't know if anybody that's listening to this has ever been actually in McClaskey Fieldhouse, but it's the arena that OU wrestles in. And it's not their big basketball arena. It's kind of smaller. It's maybe, 4,000 or 5,000 people. And, but it's a little more intimate. And if you're down there, like on the media side, fans that know me and stuff and whatever, they'll come, we'll talk wrestling. But a lot of them, their general take was like that under Rosselli, you'd see with Bedlam, for example, they wrestle 2 duels. They wrestle a home one in Norman and then one in Stillwater every year. They've done it for like 100 years. And last year, for example, OSU, it came down to the last match. It came down to 197. They ended at 197. OSU gets a fall, and it's big. But it came down to whoever won that match was going to win the duel. And then they come to Stillwater at the end of the season, and it's like not even close. So you can see this progression in what OSU's guys are doing and getting better throughout the season. And then, and even in kind of a bad year for OSU, you can see them make improvements, but OU kind of, a lot of their guys almost look worse. And that's what their general feeling was. So I say all that to say, from an OU fan standpoint, you want to see improvement. You don't want to see that. That's what you want to see out of your new regime, is this coaching staff that builds up their guys, that is making them improve throughout the season. And so that's what I think you're looking for. And you want to see, again, competitive matches where you can have competitive matches, and then, winning anything you can. And then, just wrestling hard in ones where maybe you're a little bit outgunned and the other team's favorite or whatever. So, and then with OSU, I mean, you want to, again, it's hard not to say like, yeah, you want to win the duel. I mean, because it's really like, I again, rankings and everything else, you're not the favorite, and you're Oklahoma State wrestling. You got 34 national titles, and I know Iowa State's got a ton of history of their own, and 7 national titles, and all Dan Gable, Cale Sanderson, all that good stuff. But like, if you're an Oklahoma State wrestling fan, you want to see this team, get. I think you can realistically go, hey, I want to see this team be better than the worst finish in program history, and that's what it was last year. And you want to see improvements. You want to see a better team than you saw last year. So I again, it's kind of, it's not the same thing as OU and as far as the retooling of the staff and everything, because you really got to see this staff do something quick, because Oklahoma State fans don't expect this team to, Oklahoma State wrestling is not supposed to lose. You want to see them. I don't think they expect them to beat Penn State this year or anything like that, but you want to see them really close the gap compared to where they were last year. And so beating Iowa State, puts you kind of at least number 2 in the Big 12, I guess. I mean, it doesn't really in tournament rankings and all those things, but it kind of elevates that status a little bit and gets you a little bit closer to at least where Missouri is. And, and kind of saying, hey, like, we can actually contend for a Big 12 title this year. And so I hate to say that again. I know you said not to, just say a win, but really, I think that's what you want to see from OSU, because you really want to see them kind of get back to where, they need to be, because the worst finish in program history is not where you want to see Oklahoma State if you're an Oklahoma State fan. So.
Yeah, I mean, I see Iowa State and Oklahoma State in very similar situations right now. I mean, Iowa State might be a little bit ahead, but back before Dresser got hired, Iowa State was having the worst seasons in program history under Kevin Jackson, who I like. I'm a big Kevin Jackson fan as a human, not a great head wrestling coach at least. And now, I mean, we're seeing Iowa State back to top 4 team in the rankings.
No,
I'd
and
like to see Iowa State compete with Missouri in the Big 12 for that title. I'd like to see Iowa State be a team trophy team at the end of the season. I think Oklahoma State's in a very similar spot in that regard.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I think wrestling needs that. I mean, you have
agreed.
I don't know that. I like we were kind of mentioning, like, the it's maybe a little bit up in the air with what the heck was going to happen with OU wrestling when they went to the SEC. But these rivalries go all the way back to the Big 8. I mean, this is like hundreds of years of wrestling. I mean, long time in wrestling. Iowa State and Oklahoma State are close to 100, but not hundreds of years, close to 100 years of wrestling between these rivals and stuff. And there's a lot to be said for that in the sport, and how you can kind of build that up and how you can display that. And again, Cale Sanderson, Dan Gable, all the things at Iowa State, all the history at Oklahoma State, you want to see these programs contending for, fighting for the Big 12 title and in the contention for that. I mean, it's hard to argue that they should be beating Cale Sanderson. It's just crazy what he's done at Penn State, but you shouldn't see them, like, they should be up there. It should be a 3-way battle on Saturday night, or on Sunday night at the Big 12 tournament, coming down to Missouri, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, or OU. All 4 of those teams should be, just fighting it out to try to win that tournament. And every single one of them should be in the conversation for team trophies at the NCAA tournament as well, finishing in the top 3. And I think it's again, like you said, Dresser's done this incredible job of building back Iowa State after a rough couple years. Oklahoma State's still got largely the same staff except for Coleman. but like you want to see it get to that. And I think that's, that's what the fans want. That's what the Big 12 needs. That's what Oklahoma State needs. That's what Iowa State needs. And I that's what OU needs too, is for these to be really good, strong, like the old school rivalries that they were, back all the way back to the 70s and 60s in the old Big 8 and all those things. So I hope we're getting there. I think with OSU and OSU and Iowa State, we pretty well are. I think we're gonna have a really good duel this weekend. Saturday night prime time. Should be well attended. The only thing I kind of have a little bit of the Saturday duels run into high school stuff. So you have like kids at tournaments and stuff like that, and it's hard for them to get away and then come and show up. So I hope it's well attended and all those things as well. And like I say, I hope we just have like a barn or like down to the wire duel that is exciting for fans and all those things.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. I think Oklahoma State being back in the top 5, the work they've done, the athletes they have, like you said, everything you just said, it's important. And I think the coaches would agree. Because why else would Dresser enjoy going down to Oklahoma and, getting wins? They mean more when you get to beat a good team. So, yeah Saturday's it's going to be a good one. I think we share the same sentiments when it comes to Oklahoma, that Iowa State will probably win. But, I'm excited to see Stephen Buchanan. Haven't seen much of him, at least from what I've been watching, just because, like you said, hard to watch too much when you have so much other stuff going on. So, but...
Yeah, and like I say, I hope OU could just at least kind of keep it as competitive as possible, win those matches that they can win, the toss-ups and different things, and make it, again, you just kind of want to see that angle of it. Is like they're improving, they're getting better, and then you feel good about, the future of the program with the current staff and what they have going there. So.
Awesome. Well, Seth, thank you so much for joining us. We are glad we could have you. You're truly the smartest Oklahoma wrestling person we know. So thank you for coming on and talking wrestling with us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Of course. Well, guys, thanks for listening. It was super great having Seth on, our second guest of the season. I definitely learned a lot about both programs. I wish I could follow them more closely, but sounds like Oklahoma's on the mend, and I'm excited to see where they're going to go. I'm excited to see Stephen Buchanan, and I agree with Seth that I hope it is a barn burner with Oklahoma State, with Iowa State obviously winning. Better to cover a winning team.
It is, and he said that he saw Oklahoma State as potentially favorite in the dual meet. I think it probably comes down to 165, and I'm going to take David Carr over Isaac Olenek. That's just me. Maybe he's taken Isaac. Maybe that's where he sees a difference. But I see Iowa State winning the dual meet. I think it's going to be really, really close. I do think it comes down to a match. But, we'll see what happens. That's where the rest of the dual meets.
It's going to be a good one. It's a fun weekend. It's good. It's good, as discussed, to have a healthy Big 12. And I'm excited that Oklahoma State is back up there. I'm excited John Smith is around and doing his thing. I'm a huge John Smith gal, except when he's being a psycho in the corner, because he is.
He is.
He drives me nuts at Big 12s and NCAAs. So, but yeah, as always, guys, thanks for tuning in. Shout out to Fareway, as always. I lost my train of thought as I was saying it. But anyways, thank you to Fareway, who consistently supports the sport of wrestling and is going to make it possible for us to be down in Kansas City. I had to think about that one. I keep thinking Tulsa. Thanks to my 2 trips to Tulsa. Anyways, guys, we'll be back next week to recap the weekend in Oklahoma and look ahead to West Virginia.